Good afternoon, Peg Larson here. The breaking news is that the newly elected representative, Peggy Flanagan, who is the first Native American representative, has been appointed to the Education Innovation Committee in the House, and she is taking Representative Winkler's spot that he had when he was here. So we will be meeting with her and talking to her about Rochester and on our agenda, especially before session starts. So I understand she's a very nice person. She had no opposition, so her first election was actually pretty easy. On November 10th, Chair Uyghur had a joint hearing of his finance and policy committees to talk about the achievement gap. And what he did, there were groups of people who worked together from different school districts and from across the metro, mainly the metro area, a couple outstate, but not very many, to talk about how they have been successful in bringing down the achievement gap and having their students be successful students. And the theme that ran through every one of them was the fact that they work with the family, the teacher, the superintendent many times, and the student. And I thought it was interesting because I think we've talked about this many times, how important it is to let the student know what you expect of them and that you're behind them 100% for their goals. And that really was the theme for every group that sat down. And they were very happy with their progress, and they will continue doing that. I imagine that there will be some legislation somehow crafted to address that as a method for teachers and school districts to work with students. They talked about working with minorities as well as Caucasian, and the fact that this works for all kids. The other thing they talked about, which I thought was very interesting, is Chair Uyghur has a Senate bill, Senate File 1674, and it's House File 1497, and it's Representative Erdahl who has it in the House, to require students to pass a civics test before they graduate. And that civics test is the test that people take to become a citizen. That is the test that he wants used. And it was really very interesting because the veterans came up and testified on how important they thought that was, and the fact that civics needs to be more of an important subject in our schools, and that test is a great way to evaluate whether students do it or not. And they had given 6 questions to the senators for them to answer in private, but they did give the questions, and I got all right. So I just thought I would brag a little bit. But the senators were looking a little sheepish, a couple of them. But then after that, representatives from the League of Women Voters came and testified against it and said that they thought that was too difficult of a test and it should not be a high school requirement, but the test should be developed by civics teachers, and so that it was what they were teaching the students, so that the test would be it'd be more advantageous for the student to take. Then in the House, Chair Loon had a joint hearing on the new laws that passed for teacher evaluation, the rules and standards that passed, and she feels very strongly that they are not being adhered to quickly enough, and that this is a quote, of paramount importance to get our teachers up to par. It was discussed also that there need to be more minority teachers and how they could possibly go about doing that. They also talked about the fact that there needs to be more discussion around this subject and another hearing addressing this. They felt that, at least the chair felt, that this is not being paid enough attention to, and that this is just kind of slipping by, and that the teacher evaluation is not being implemented properly. She will have, I'm sure, another meeting on this. It was interesting because they still are talking about the failure rate of teachers taking this test, which was the big concern before, that you would have a really excellent teacher and they could not maybe pass the English test or the math test, but they were really a good teacher, and you could not keep them after a certain period of time. I believe it's 3 years if they can't pass this test. So, as I said, Chair Loon feels that it is paramount that they address this and make sure that we are getting high-quality teachers. Just a throwback to the last meeting of the Senate, not this November 10th one, but the one before that, Senator Alice Johnson talked about the fact that she has never known a teacher who passed or didn't pass the test and that made them a good teacher, that they did pass the test or it made them a bad teacher. So I'm sure that this discussion will also be continued in the Senate. There will be many hearings between now and the beginning of March when the legislature goes back into session. And what I know that Chair Uyghur is doing is setting up his agenda for that session. Even though technically it's short, it will be very intense, and I believe that there will be long hours making sure that some of these things get done. There is money, and always when there's money, there are people who want that money. We need to position ourselves to defend getting money for schools and not just having cash for transportation or giving all the money back or different ideas that are floating out there. This is the best the economy has been, I understand, excuse me, nationwide in the last 10 years, especially here in Minnesota. And we have to be very defensive to make sure that that money doesn't disappear as it has in the past. I'd like to introduce you to one of my favorite pupil units. Cammie, come. Come here. Can you tell them your name?
Camila Pizarro.
Camila Pizarro is my granddaughter, and she is one of my very favorite, beautiful and bright pupil units. Thank you for your time. I hope you all have a wonderful, blessed Thanksgiving.
John Call here. Sometimes the legislature is like the Bourbon dynasty. They've learned nothing and they've forgotten nothing they've learned. That's my concern as we go into the next session. There's probably going to be $1.5 billion surplus. The tendency is going to be to want to do two things. They want to fund a transportation bill without raising taxes, and there's going to be a lot of people who want to give it all back with tax relief. And we now are in a situation where we've been in this period of economic growth. It's one of the longest sustained periods of economic growth in history. It's been slow. It hasn't lifted everybody up equally, but this period of upward growth isn't going to go on forever. And so my fear is that the next session, with an election after it, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to want to, as I said, do a transportation bill and then give a bunch of tax rebates. And it seems to me that we're setting ourselves up once again for another big deficit down the road when the economy goes south. So I think we need to be aware of that, and I think concerned about that as we go into the next session. One other thing I wanted to mention is there's been two significant retirements announced in the last month or two. First, of course, would be our own Kim Norton, who's just been an excellent legislator and very good to work with and a strong advocate for the district. And the second announcement came today, and that's Ann Lincheski from Bloomington. And she's been very important in terms of tax policy for at least the last decade, played a major role in that. So those are two swing districts. They're occupied by Democrats. It's going to make the next election more interesting. Thanks. We'll be back soon. Things are starting to heat up. More and more activity. Talk soon.